Close your eyes and picture the desert at night. Endless darkness stretches across the Nevada landscape, broken only by distant mountains silhouetted against the stars. The air is dry and cool. Silence fills the vast emptiness. Then, slowly, a glow appears on the horizon. Neon lights pierce through the darkness. Music drifts across the sand. Laughter echoes from somewhere unseen. This is Las Vegas, a city that should never have existed, built by men who operated in the shadows, powered by money that flowed through secret channels, shaped by ambitions both brilliant and ruthless. The story of the mob in Las Vegas is unlike any other chapter in American history. It is a tale of transformation. How organized crime turned a desolate patch of desert into one of the most famous cities on earth. It is a story of money and power, of violence and glamour, of legal businesses built on illegal fortunes. Few places in the United States allowed organized crime to operate so openly, profit so enormously, and shape the identity of an entire city. What began as small-scale gambling operations evolved into a sophisticated national pipeline of criminal profits, managed by some of the most powerful crime syndicates in the country. The mob's influence in Las Vegas lasted nearly half a century. During that time, they built the casinos that defined the city's skyline. They created the entertainment culture that made Las Vegas synonymous with excess and possibility. They established systems of operation that generated millions in untaxed profits. And they did all of this while law enforcement slowly, methodically, built the cases that would eventually bring their empire crashing down. But to understand how the mob came to dominate Las Vegas, we must first travel back in time, to an era when America itself was being reshaped by crime, corruption, and an ill-fated social experiment called Prohibition. The birth of organized crime in America. The year is 1920. America has just emerged from the First World War. The economy is booming. Cities are growing, technology is advancing, and on the 16th of January, the 18th Amendment to the United States Constitution goes into effect, banning the manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcoholic beverages across the entire nation. This law, born from decades of temperance activism and moral reform movements, was intended to create a healthier, more virtuous society. Instead, it created the golden age of organized crime. The temperance movement had been building for decades. Religious groups, particularly Protestant denominations, argued that alcohol was the root of poverty, domestic violence, and moral decay. Women's organizations joined the cause, seeing alcohol as a threat to families and communities. Progressive reformers believed that banning alcohol would cure numerous social ills. By 1919, they had succeeded in getting the 18th Amendment ratified by the required number of states, but the amendment was flawed from the beginning. It assumed that Americans would simply stop drinking once alcohol became illegal. This assumption proved spectacularly wrong. People continued to want alcohol. They wanted it at parties and social gatherings. They wanted it at restaurants. They wanted it in their homes. The demand was enormous and persistent. This created an opportunity unlike anything criminals had ever seen. Before Prohibition, most criminals operated on a small scale. Pickpockets, burglars, local gambling dens. But bootlegging required organization, capital, and connections. It required the ability to manufacture or smuggle large quantities of alcohol, distribute it to thousands of speakeasies, collect money from customers, and bribe officials to avoid prosecution. This was not petty crime. This was big business. Prohibition lasted 13 years, from 1920 to 1933. During that period, criminal organizations across America transformed from small-time street gangs into sophisticated business empires. The demand for alcohol did not disappear when it became illegal. In fact, it remained almost as strong as before. Millions of Americans still wanted to drink, still wanted to socialize in bars and speakeasies, still wanted access to beer, wine, and spirits. This created an enormous black market opportunity. In cities like New York, Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, Kansas City, and Milwaukee, criminal syndicates rushed to fill the void. They established secret breweries and distilleries. They smuggled alcohol across the Canadian and Mexican borders. They bribed police officers, judges, and politicians to look the other way. They opened thousands of illegal bars called speakeasies, hidden behind unmarked doors and protected by passwords, and they made staggering amounts of money. The most famous figure of this era was Al Capone, who controlled bootlegging operations in Chicago. At the height of his power, Capone's organization generated an estimated $60 million per year, an astronomical sum in the 1920s. But Capone was far from alone. In New York, Charles Luciano organized the 5 families that would come to dominate the American mafia. In Detroit, the Purple Gang controlled the flow of Canadian whiskey across the border. In Kansas City, the Pendergast political machine worked hand in hand with organized crime to control both the underworld and city government. These criminal organizations were not simply violent street gangs. They were businesses, complex, hierarchical, and increasingly sophisticated. They employed accountants to launder money through legitimate fronts. They hired lawyers to navigate legal troubles. They maintained relationships with corrupt officials at every level of government. And perhaps most importantly, they began to cooperate with one another on a national scale. In 1931, Lucky Luciano helped establish what became known as the Commission, a governing council that coordinated activities between different mafia families across the country. The Commission mediated disputes, approved major decisions, and prevented the kind of violent gang wars that had plagued the 1920s. It brought order to organized crime, turning what had been a chaotic landscape of competing gangs into a more structured, business-like operation. But then, in 1933, everything changed. The 21st Amendment was ratified, repealing prohibition. Alcohol became legal again. The enormous profits from bootlegging vanished almost overnight. Criminal organizations across America suddenly faced a critical question. How would they replace the massive revenue that bootlegging had generated? They needed new sources of income, new businesses to invest in, new opportunities to exploit. Some turned to labor racketeering, taking control of unions and using them to extort money from businesses. Some focused on illegal gambling operations in major cities. Some expanded into narcotics trafficking, though many old-school mafia bosses initially resisted drug dealing. But the most ambitious criminals began looking westward, to a small desert town in Nevada, where something unusual was happening. Las Vegas was about to become legal. Nevada legalizes gambling. In the early 1930s, Nevada was struggling. The Great Depression had devastated the American economy, and Nevada, one of the least populous states in the country, was hit particularly hard. Mining operations shut down, unemployment soared, state revenues plummeted. Desperate for any source of economic activity, Nevada's legislature began considering proposals that other states would never contemplate. On the 19th of March, 1931, Nevada legalized casino gambling. This was not the first time gambling had been legal in Nevada. The state had permitted gambling in the late 1800s, banned it in 1910, then legalized it again briefly in the 1920s. But the 1931 legalization was different. It was permanent, comprehensive, and designed to attract outside investment. The state hoped that legal gambling would bring tourists, create jobs, and generate tax revenue during the worst economic crisis in American history. At first, the results were modest. Small casinos opened in Reno, which was already known for its easy divorce laws and attracted visitors from California. A few gambling halls appeared in Las Vegas, which at the time was little more than a dusty railroad town with a population of around 5,000 people. These early casinos were nothing like the grand resorts that would later define Las Vegas. They were simple operations. A few card tables, some slot machines, a bar. Nothing glamorous, nothing that would attract national attention. But there was something else about Nevada's gambling laws that made the state uniquely attractive to certain investors. The regulatory system was extremely weak. There were few restrictions on who could own a casino. Background checks were minimal or non-existent. Oversight of casino operations was limited, and there was a strong cultural tolerance for vice. Nevada had always been a frontier state where people minded their own business and asked few questions. This combination, legal gambling, light regulation, and a cash-heavy business, created perfect conditions for organized crime. Money from illegal enterprises is difficult to manage. If a mobster makes millions from bootlegging or gambling rackets, he cannot simply deposit that money in a bank. Large cash deposits raise questions. Tax authorities become suspicious. The money needs to be laundered, run through legitimate businesses that can explain its origin. Casinos were ideal for this purpose. They handled enormous amounts of cash every day. It was easy to mix illegal money with legal gambling revenue, and with weak oversight, there was little risk of detection. Throughout the 1930s and early 1940s, mob figures began quietly investing in Nevada casinos. They typically operated in the background, providing financing to frontmen who held the official licenses. They expected a share of the profits in return, but kept their names out of public records. This arrangement worked well for both sides. The frontmen got access to capital they could not obtain from legitimate banks. The mobsters got a place to invest their illegal profits and generate legal income. For years, this system operated quietly, attracting little attention from law enforcement or the media. Las Vegas remained a small town. The casinos were modest. The profits, while steady, were not spectacular. But everything was about to change, because a charismatic, violent, ambitious mobster named Benjamin Siegel was about to arrive in Las Vegas with a vision that would transform the city forever. Bugsy Siegel and the Flamingo. Benjamin Siegel did not like being called Bugsy. The nickname came from his violent temper and unpredictable behavior. Bugsy being slang for crazy. Those who knew him well avoided using it in his presence. Siegel was handsome, charming, and sophisticated. He wore expensive suits, dated Hollywood actresses, and moved easily through high society. But beneath the polished exterior was a man capable of sudden, shocking violence. Siegel had committed his first murder as a teenager and would be linked to numerous killings throughout his criminal career. Born in 1906 in Brooklyn, New York, Siegel grew up in poverty and turned to crime at an early age. He formed a close partnership with Meyer Lansky, another young Jewish gangster who would become one of organized crime's most brilliant minds. Together, Siegel and Lansky ran bootlegging operations, gambling rackets, and murder for hire services. They worked with Italian mafia families, forming alliances that crossed ethnic lines at a time when such cooperation was unusual. During the 1930s, Siegel moved to Los Angeles, where he established connections with Hollywood celebrities and legitimate business people. He maintained ties to organized crime families in New York and Chicago, serving as a West Coast representative. He ran illegal gambling operations. He participated in various criminal enterprises, and he began to see opportunities in Las Vegas. Siegel was not the first mobster to invest in Las Vegas casinos, but he would become the most famous, and his project would set the template for everything that followed. In 1945, Siegel became involved in a casino project called the Flamingo Hotel. The property was originally conceived by Billy Wilkerson, a Hollywood entrepreneur who owned nightclubs and the trade publication, The Hollywood Reporter. Wilkerson had purchased land on Highway 91, the main road connecting Las Vegas to Los Angeles, and began planning a luxurious resort that would be unlike anything Las Vegas had ever seen. But Wilkerson ran out of money. He needed investors, and Siegel saw an opportunity. With backing from organized crime families in New York and Chicago, including Lucky Luciano's organization and the Chicago outfit, Siegel took control of the project. He became the public face of the Flamingo, overseeing construction and planning the resort's operations. Siegel's vision for the Flamingo was ambitious. He wanted to create something truly spectacular, a resort that would attract Hollywood stars, wealthy tourists, and high rollers from across the country. The Flamingo would offer fine dining in multiple restaurants. It would have a showroom featuring top entertainment. It would have a swimming pool, lush gardens, and luxurious rooms. Every detail would be first class. Every element would be designed to project elegance and sophistication. This was a radical departure from existing Las Vegas casinos, which were generally rough, simple establishments focused solely on gambling. Siegel believed that if you created the right atmosphere, if you made people feel glamorous and important, they would come to Las Vegas in greater numbers and spend more money. He was right. The model he pioneered would define Las Vegas for decades. But there was a problem. The Flamingo's construction costs spiraled out of control. Initial estimates had placed the budget at around $1.5 million. But as construction progressed, that number climbed to $2 million, then $3 million, then $4 million. By the time the Flamingo was ready to open, the total cost had exceeded $6 million. an astronomical sum in the 1940s. Some of this was due to mismanagement and construction challenges. Building materials were scarce in the years immediately following the Second World War. Contractors took advantage of the situation to charge inflated prices. Delays created additional costs. But there were also allegations that Segal was skimming money from the construction budget, taking funds provided by the mob investors and diverting them to secret bank accounts. Whether these allegations were true remains debated by historians. What is certain is that Segal's investors in New York and Chicago became increasingly concerned about the project's ballooning costs and uncertain prospects. The Flamingo opened on the 26th of December, 1946. It was not a success. The opening night was plagued with problems. The resort was not fully complete. Many of the hotel rooms were not yet finished. Bad weather grounded flights from Los Angeles, preventing many invited celebrities from attending. The entertainment was underwhelming, and perhaps most damaging, the casino lost money. Gamblers won more than the house took in, creating immediate financial losses. After just a few weeks, Segal closed the Flamingo to complete construction and address the problems. It reopened in March 1947 with better results. Business improved. The casino began generating profits. The entertainment improved. Slowly, the Flamingo started to fulfill Segal's vision. But it was too late for Benjamin Segal. On the 20th of June, 1947, Segal was sitting in the living room of his girlfriend's Beverly Hills mansion, reading a newspaper. At approximately 10:45 in the evening, someone fired a rifle through the window. 9 shots rang out. 4 bullets struck Segal, one passing through his right eye and exiting through the back of his skull. He died instantly. The murder was never officially solved. No one was ever arrested or charged. But the circumstances left little doubt about who ordered the killing. Within hours of Segal's death, mob associates walked into the Flamingo and took control of operations. The Chicago outfit and New York families had decided that Segal was a liability. He had spent too much of their money, generated too much attention, and possibly stolen from them. His execution was business, not personal. Segal's death became one of the most famous mob hits in American history. Photographs of his bullet-riddled body appeared in newspapers across the country. The story had everything: a handsome gangster, Hollywood connections, a glamorous casino, and a violent end. It captured the public imagination and established a mythic connection between Las Vegas and organized crime. But more importantly, Segal's death marked a turning point. After the Flamingo proved successful under new management, organized crime families across America realized that Las Vegas casinos could be extraordinarily profitable. The city offered legal gambling, weak regulation, enormous cash flow, and opportunities for both legitimate profits and illegal skimming. Over the next 2 decades, the mob would build an empire in the desert. The golden age of the skim. Picture a casino counting room in Las Vegas during the 1950s. It is late at night. The casino floor is still buzzing with activity. Slot machines ringing, cards shuffling, dice rolling. But upstairs, away from the public areas, a more private operation is underway. Casino employees are counting the day's take. Stacks of cash cover the tables. $100 bills, 50s, 20s, 10s, 5s, all the money that flowed across gaming tables and into slot machines throughout the day. In a legitimate casino, all of this money would be counted, recorded, and reported to state regulators. Taxes would be paid on the profits. Everything would be documented. But in a mob-controlled casino, something else happens first. Before the official count begins, before any records are created, trusted employees remove a portion of the cash. Maybe 10%, maybe 15%, sometimes more. This money is set aside, placed in bags or briefcases, and prepared for transport. It never appears in the casino's official records. As far as the state of Nevada knows, this money never existed. This is the skim. The skim was the heart of organized crime's Las Vegas operation. It was incredibly profitable because it represented pure, untaxed profit. The mob families who controlled casinos were making money through legitimate operations. They owned or controlled profitable businesses that generated millions in legal revenue. But on top of that legal profit, they were skimming millions more in unreported cash. This money would be transported back to mob bosses in Chicago, Kansas City, Cleveland, Detroit, Milwaukee, and other cities. Sometimes couriers carried cash in suitcases, disguised as ordinary travelers. Sometimes the money was hidden in shipments of goods leaving Las Vegas. Sometimes it was laundered through complicated financial transactions designed to obscure its origin. But however it traveled, the skim represented a massive flow of wealth, from Las Vegas casinos to organized crime families across America. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, many of Las Vegas's most prominent casinos were financed, controlled, or influenced by the mob. The Desert Inn, opened in 1950, had connections to Cleveland organized crime. The Sands, opened in 1952, had ties to various mob families and became famous as the headquarters of Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack. The Riviera, opened in 1955, was linked to the Chicago outfit. The Tropicana, opened in 1957, had connections to Kansas City and New Orleans crime families. The Stardust, which opened in 1958 and would later become central to the largest skimming operation, was controlled by the Chicago outfit. These casinos were not dark, seedy establishments. They were glamorous resorts that attracted celebrities, entertainers, and wealthy visitors from around the world. They featured world-class entertainment. Frank Sinatra performed regularly at the Sands. Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Joey Bishop, and Peter Lawford joined him, creating the legendary Rat Pack performances that defined 1960s Las Vegas. Elvis Presley performed at multiple Las Vegas casinos throughout his career. Liberace became a Las Vegas institution. These were the golden years of Las Vegas entertainment, when seeing a show on the Strip was considered the height of sophistication. But behind the glamour, the mob maintained control through a careful structure. They used frontmen, individuals with no obvious criminal connections, who could obtain gaming licenses and serve as the public face of ownership. These frontmen were often legitimate business people who needed mob financing to purchase or build casinos. The arrangement benefited both parties. The frontmen got access to capital and the opportunity to run profitable businesses. The mob got control of casinos without putting their own names on official documents. Casino management positions were often held by mob associates. individuals who understood the operation and could be trusted to protect the organization's interests. They supervised the skim, ensured that money flowed to the right people, and prevented employees from stealing. Violence was rarely necessary on a day-to-day basis. The threat of violence was usually sufficient. Everyone understood the rules. Everyone knew what would happen if they stole from the mob or cooperated with law enforcement. The system worked remarkably well for years. Law enforcement agencies suspected mob involvement in Las Vegas casinos, but proving it was difficult. The frontmen appeared to be legitimate owners. The skimming operation was conducted carefully, with only trusted employees involved. Money was transported discreetly. And Nevada's gaming regulators, while not entirely corrupt, had limited resources and often preferred not to look too closely at casino ownership. But the Federal Bureau of Investigation was watching, and in the coming years, they would develop the tools and techniques necessary to penetrate the mob's Las Vegas empire. The Chicago outfit in Las Vegas. No organized crime family had more influence in Las Vegas than the Chicago outfit. The outfit, as it was commonly known, was the successor to Al Capone's bootlegging empire. After Capone was imprisoned for tax evasion in 1931, the organization evolved under new leadership. By the 1950s and 60s, the outfit was one of the most powerful criminal organizations in America, with interests in illegal gambling, loan sharking, labor racketeering, and Las Vegas casinos. The outfit's control over Las Vegas operations centered on several key casinos, most notably the Stardust, the Fremont, the Marina, and the Hacienda. These properties generated enormous profits, both legitimate and illegal. The Stardust alone was one of the largest casinos in Las Vegas, with over 1,000 hotel rooms and extensive gaming facilities. The amount of money flowing through these casinos was staggering. Managing these operations required individuals with specific skills. They needed to understand casino operations, gambling, and entertainment. They needed to be able to run profitable businesses while maintaining the illegal skimming operation. They needed to interact with Nevada regulators and law enforcement without raising suspicion. And they needed to be absolutely loyal to the outfit. One of the most important figures in this operation was Frank Lefty Rosenthal. Rosenthal was not a typical mobster. He was not violent. He did not participate in traditional organized crime activities like robbery or extortion. Instead, Rosenthal was a professional gambler and sports bettor, one of the most skilled in the country. He understood odds, probabilities, and how to run profitable gambling operations. He had worked with the Chicago outfit for years, managing illegal bookmaking operations in Florida and Chicago before coming to Las Vegas. In the early 1970s, Rosenthal became the de facto boss of the outfit's Las Vegas casinos. He could not officially hold a gaming license. His criminal associations and past arrests made that impossible. But he ran operations nonetheless, using various titles and working through frontmen who held the official licenses. For years, he managed the Stardust, the Fremont, the Marina, and the Hacienda simultaneously, overseeing every aspect of their operations. Rosenthal was brilliant at his job. He revolutionized Las Vegas sports betting by installing the first licensed sports book inside a casino. Previously, sports betting in Las Vegas had been limited or conducted through illegal bookmakers. Rosenthal saw an opportunity to make it a major casino amenity, and he was right. Sports betting became enormously popular and profitable. His innovations changed the industry. He also improved casino operations generally. He understood customer service and created programs to attract and retain high rollers. He hired better dealers and pit bosses. He improved entertainment offerings. Under his management, the outfit's casinos became more profitable, both in legitimate revenue and in the amount available for skimming. But Rosenthal's success created problems. His high profile made him a target for law enforcement. Nevada gaming regulators repeatedly tried to force him to apply for a gaming license, knowing he would be denied. The FBI was aware of his connections to organized crime and monitored his activities. And perhaps most dangerously, Rosenthal's personal life became increasingly chaotic. His marriage was tumultuous and highly public. He suspected his wife of having an affair, which, in fact, she was. The man she was seeing was Tony Spilotro, Rosenthal's supposed friend and the Chicago outfit's enforcer in Las Vegas. This situation would have explosive consequences. The enforcer, Tony Spilotro. If Frank Rosenthal represented the business side of the mob's Las Vegas operation, Tony Spilotro represented the muscle. Anthony Tony the Ant Spilotro was born in Chicago in 1938. He grew up in an Italian neighborhood where organized crime was a normal part of life. He became involved in criminal activities at a young age and quickly developed a reputation for violence. Spilotro was not a large man. He stood only about 5 feet 5 inches tall, which contributed to his nickname, the Ant. But what he lacked in size, he made up for in viciousness. Spilotro became a made member of the Chicago outfit and participated in numerous murders, extortions, and other violent crimes. He was skilled with weapons, ruthless in his methods, and absolutely loyal to their outfit, at least initially. In the early 1970s, the outfit sent Spilotro to Las Vegas with this specific mission: protect the organization's interests, prevent anyone from stealing, and ensure that the skimming operation continued without interference. Spilotro's arrival in Las Vegas marked the beginning of a new, more violent era in the city's mob history. His job was to operate in the shadows, using intimidation and violence to maintain control. But Spilotro could not resist expanding his activities. He established a street crew in Las Vegas, a group of criminals who carried out burglaries, robberies, and other crimes under his direction. They called themselves the Hole in the Wall Gang because their preferred method was to break through walls to access businesses and homes. They stole jewelry, cash, and valuables, fencing the stolen goods through networks Spilotro controlled. They ran loan sharking operations, lending money at exorbitant interest rates, and using violence to collect debts. Spilotro also became involved in murders in Las Vegas. While the exact number is unknown, he is believed to have been responsible for numerous killings. Some victims were buried in the Nevada desert and have never been found. The most famous murder linked to Spilotro was that of William Tiny Dauber, a Chicago mob associate killed in 1980. Spilotro's violent reputation spread throughout Las Vegas's underworld. People feared him. Criminals avoided crossing him. Even legitimate business people knew to be cautious around him. But Spilotro's activities created serious problems for the outfit's Las Vegas operation. The Chicago bosses wanted their casinos to appear legitimate. They wanted to maintain the skim without attracting law enforcement attention. Spilotro's violent crimes and high-profile criminal activities did the opposite. They brought intense scrutiny from local police, the FBI, and Nevada gaming regulators. Law enforcement agencies began investigating Spilotro's crew. Burglaries were traced back to his associates. Informants provided information about his activities. And most damaging, Spilotro's presence in Las Vegas gave the FBI leverage to pressure casino employees and associates into cooperation. The threat of Spilotro's violence could be used to convince people to testify against him and the broader organization. Spilotro's relationship with Frank Rosenthal also became a problem. As mentioned earlier, Spilotro had an affair with Rosenthal's wife, Jerry. This created personal animosity between the two men at a time when they needed to work together. It also created gossip and attention that the outfit wanted to avoid. The Chicago bosses became increasingly frustrated with Spilotro's inability to stay in the background and simply do his job. But the final straw came when Spilotro became the subject of intense FBI investigation. Agents wiretapped his phones, followed him constantly, and built cases against him for various crimes. In 1983, Spilotro was indicted on multiple charges related to his criminal activities in Las Vegas. The outfit realized that Spilotro had become a liability. He was attracting too much attention, creating too many problems, and putting the entire Las Vegas operation at risk. In June 1986, Tony Spilotro and his brother Michael were lured to a meeting in Illinois. They believed they were going to be promoted within the outfit. Instead, they were beaten to death and buried in an Indiana cornfield. Their bodies were discovered a week later. The murders were almost certainly ordered by the Chicago outfit's leadership, who had decided that Spilotro's usefulness had ended. Spilotro's death marked the beginning of the end for the mob's control of Las Vegas. But the real threat to their empire was not internal violence. It was the relentless investigation being conducted by federal law enforcement. The FBI closes in. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, the Federal Bureau of Investigation had been building cases against organized crime families across America. The agency had developed sophisticated surveillance techniques. They planted listening devices in mob hangouts, cars, and homes. They wiretapped phones. They recruited informants from within organized crime organizations. They used undercover agents to infiltrate criminal operations. And they analyzed financial records to trace money flows and prove criminal activity. In Las Vegas, the FBI faced particular challenges. The casinos were legal businesses. The frontmen who officially owned them often had no criminal records. The skimming operation was conducted discreetly. Proving mob control required extensive evidence, not just suspicions, but hard proof that would convince juries. The breakthrough came through wiretaps placed in mob strongholds far from Las Vegas. In Chicago, FBI agents planted listening devices in locations frequented by outfit members. They recorded thousands of hours of conversations. In these recordings, Chicago mob bosses discussed loss, Vegas casinos, skimming operations, and the division of profits. They mentioned specific casinos, specific amounts of money, and specific individuals involved in the operation. The evidence was devastating. Similar wiretaps were placed in Kansas City, Cleveland, and Milwaukee. In each city, FBI agents recorded mob leaders discussing their Las Vegas interests. They talked about sending couriers to pick up skimmed money. They discussed problems with casino operations. They argued about how profits should be divided. Every conversation provided more evidence of a massive, coordinated criminal conspiracy. The FBI also pressured individuals involved in the skim to cooperate. Casino employees who had participated in skimming were offered deals, testify against the mob bosses, and receive reduced sentences or immunity. Some refused, remaining loyal to the organization, but others, faced with the prospect of long prison sentences, agreed to cooperate. Their testimony provided insider details about how the skim worked, who was involved, and where the money went. One of the most important cooperating witnesses was Frank Rosenthal. After surviving a car bombing in 1982, an attack that was likely an attempt on his life by the mob, Rosenthal became more willing to talk to authorities. He did not become a traditional informant, but he provided information that helped investigators understand the structure and operations of the mob's Las Vegas empire. By the early 1980s, the FBI had built overwhelming cases against organized crime's involvement in Las Vegas. The most significant prosecution became known as the straw man case, named after the practice of using frontmen to control casinos. The straw man trials. The straw man investigation focused on the Stardust, Fremont, Marina, and Hacienda casinos, all controlled by the Chicago outfit with participation from Kansas City, Cleveland, and Milwaukee crime families. The FBI's evidence showed that these casinos had been systematically skimming money for years. The total amount skimmed was estimated to be in the tens of millions of dollars, possibly more than $100 million over the course of the operation. This money had been divided among mob families, enriching bosses who had never set foot in Las Vegas, but controlled its most profitable casinos from cities hundreds of miles away. In 1983, federal prosecutors began bringing indictments. Mob bosses from Chicago, Kansas City, and Cleveland were charged with conspiracy, racketeering, and interstate transportation of stolen property. The charges carried lengthy prison sentences. The trials were complex, involving dozens of defendants, hundreds of pieces of evidence, and testimony from cooperating witnesses who described the skim in detail. The trials were sensational. For the first time, the public heard detailed testimony about how organized crime controlled Las Vegas casinos. Witnesses described counting room procedures where cash was diverted before official counts. They explained courier systems where trusted individuals transported money to mob bosses. They named names and described meetings where profits were divided. The defense attorneys argued that their clients were legitimate business people, that any skimming was conducted by rogue employees without the knowledge of ownership, and that the evidence was circumstantial. But the prosecution had wiretaps, actual recordings of mob bosses discussing the skim. The juries heard the defendants' own voices talking about Las Vegas money, complaining about amounts, and discussing who should receive what share. The convictions came in waves. Kansas City mob bosses were convicted. Cleveland bosses were convicted. Chicago outfit leaders were convicted. The sentences were severe. Many defendants received 10, 15 or 20 years in federal prison. The outfit's Las Vegas operation was dismantled. The flow of skimmed money stopped. An era had ended. But the strawman trials were not the only factor that destroyed the mob's control of Las Vegas. An equally important development was the rise of corporate ownership of casinos. The corporate takeover. In 1966, an eccentric billionaire arrived in Las Vegas and began quietly buying casinos. Howard Hughes was one of the wealthiest men in America. He had made his fortune in aviation, film production, and defense contracting. By the 1960s, he had become increasingly reclusive and eccentric, living in the penthouse of the Desert Inn casino and rarely leaving his rooms. But despite his odd behavior, Hughes was a shrewd businessman with enormous financial resources. Hughes began purchasing Las Vegas casinos. He bought the Desert Inn, the Sands, the Frontier, the Silver Slipper, the Castaways, and the Landmark. He spent hundreds of millions of dollars acquiring properties that had previously been controlled or influenced by organized crime. His purchases served multiple purposes. They gave him legitimate investments for his vast wealth. They allowed him to reshape Las Vegas's image. And most importantly for the city, they began pushing organized crime out of casino ownership. Hughes's approach to casino ownership was completely different from the mob's. He brought in professional management. He established corporate structures with boards of directors and compliance departments. He hired accountants to maintain proper financial records. He submitted to regulatory oversight. Everything was documented, reported, and transparent, at least compared to mob operations. Other corporations followed Hughes's example. Hilton Hotels purchased several Las Vegas casinos. Holiday Inn entered the market. MGM, the famous film studio, built the MGM Grand, which when it opened in 1973 was the largest hotel in the world. These corporations brought Wall Street money to Las Vegas. They issued public stock. They reported quarterly earnings. They answered to shareholders. Corporate ownership made skimming virtually impossible. Public companies were required to maintain rigorous accounting standards. They were audited by independent firms. Their financial statements were scrutinized by investors and regulators. There was no way to systematically remove cash from a casino without it appearing in the records. The corporate model eliminated the opacity that had allowed the mob to operate. The corporations also changed Las Vegas's culture and image. They wanted Las Vegas to be seen as a legitimate entertainment destination, not a mob-controlled vice capital. They invested in family-friendly attractions, though this trend would later reverse. They hired celebrity chefs and created world-class restaurants. They built massive resort complexes with thousands of rooms, multiple pools, shopping centers, and convention facilities. By the late 1980s, corporate ownership dominated Las Vegas. The major strip casinos were owned by publicly traded companies or large hotel chains. Gaming regulations had been strengthened. Background checks on casino owners and key employees became more thorough. The Nevada Gaming Control Board and Nevada Gaming Commission gained more resources and authority. The mob's era was over, but the transition was not instantaneous or simple. Throughout the 1980s, elements of organized crime still operated in Las Vegas. Some maintained hidden interests in smaller casinos, Some conducted illegal activities like loan sharking and bookmaking outside the casinos. Tony Spilotro's crew, for example, continued criminal operations until his murder in 1986. The complete elimination of mob influence took years. The legacy of the mob era. By the early 1990s, the mob's active control of Las Vegas had essentially ended. The major casinos were owned by corporations. The skimming operations had been shut down. The bosses who had controlled Las Vegas from Chicago, Kansas City, and Cleveland were dead or in prison. Federal and state law enforcement had won their decades-long battle against organized crime's Las Vegas empire. But the mob's influence on Las Vegas did not simply disappear. It shaped the city in ways that persist to this day. The mob built many of the iconic casinos that defined Las Vegas for generations. The Flamingo, though completely rebuilt multiple times, still operates on the same site where Bugsy Siegel's vision first came to life. The concept of the integrated resort, combining gambling, entertainment, fine dining, and luxury accommodations, was pioneered by mob-controlled casinos. This model remains the foundation of Las Vegas's economy. The mob established Las Vegas as an entertainment capital. They brought Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack to the Sands. They created the showroom culture where major stars performed regularly. They understood that entertainment could attract visitors who would then gamble, dine, and stay in hotels. Modern Las Vegas still operates on this principle, though now the entertainment includes Cirque du Soleil, celebrity residencies, and nightclubs, rather than traditional lounge acts. The mob also created Las Vegas's mystique and mythology. The stories of Bugsy Siegel, Tony Spilotro, Frank Rosenthal, and countless others became part of American popular culture. Films like Casino and Bugsy romanticized the era, creating a glamorous image of mob-controlled Las Vegas that contrasts sharply with the corporate reality of the modern city. This mythology attracts tourists who want to experience something of the old Las Vegas, even though that era has long since ended. In downtown Las Vegas, the Mob Museum opened in 2012, occupying a historic federal building where some of the mob trials were held. The museum presents a detailed, historically accurate account of organized crime's role in Las Vegas and the law enforcement efforts to combat it. It has become one of the city's most popular tourist attractions, demonstrating the enduring public fascination with this chapter of history. The mob era also left more troubling legacies. Organized crime brought violence to Las Vegas. Murders, beatings, and intimidation were part of the system that maintained mob control. Some victims were criminals themselves, killed in disputes or as punishment for disloyalty. But others were innocent people who happened to be in the wrong place or knew too much. The desert surrounding Las Vegas became a dumping ground for bodies, some of which have never been found. The mob's corruption of government officials also had lasting effects. Police officers, judges, and politicians who accepted bribes in the mob era undermined public trust in institutions. Even after organized crime's control ended, Las Vegas had to work to rebuild its reputation and demonstrate that its government and law enforcement could not be bought. The evolution continues. Las Vegas today bears little resemblance to the city that Bugsy Siegel envisioned, or that Frank Rosenthal managed. The modern Las Vegas Strip is dominated by massive corporate resorts. The MGM Grand, Caesar's Palace, the Venetian, the Bellagio, the Wynn. These properties are owned by public companies with billions of dollars in annual revenue. They employ tens of thousands of people. They host millions of visitors each year. They generate enormous tax revenue for Nevada. The gambling industry itself has changed dramatically. Technology has transformed casino operations. Slot machines are computerized and networked. Table games use advanced surveillance systems. Every transaction is tracked and recorded. The kind of casual skimming that occurred in the mob era would be detected immediately by modern systems. Las Vegas has also diversified beyond gambling. While casino gaming remains important, the city now generates substantial revenue from conventions, entertainment, dining, nightlife, and shopping. Major sporting events have come to Las Vegas. The city now hosts professional hockey, football, and soon baseball teams. Formula One racing has arrived. The city actively cultivates an image of sophistication and luxury, rather than vice and sin. But the mob era remains a defining part of Las Vegas's identity. It is the foundation story, the origin myth, that explains how a desert town became a global city. Tour companies offer mob history tours. Books and documentaries continue to explore the era. Whenever someone thinks of old Las Vegas, they think of the glamour, danger, and excitement of the mob years. This nostalgia is somewhat ironic. The mob era was characterized by violence, corruption, and criminal exploitation. It was not actually a better time for most people who lived in Las Vegas. The modern, corporate Las Vegas offers more jobs, better wages, safer streets, and greater economic opportunities. But there is something compelling about the mob era's combination of glamour and danger, sophistication and violence, legitimate business and criminal enterprise. Perhaps this fascination reflects something about American culture more broadly. The mob in Las Vegas represents the American dream pursued through illegal means. Immigrants and outsiders building empires, achieving wealth and power, living luxurious lifestyles. It also represents American capitalism at its most raw and unregulated, where anything was possible and rules could be bent or broken. The mob era was a time when a charismatic criminal like Bugsy Siegel could imagine building a palace in the desert, when a sports bettor like Frank Rosenthal could run multiple casinos without a license, when enormous fortunes could be made and lost on the turn of a card. Understanding the mob's success. Why was organized crime so successful in Las Vegas for so long? Several factors combined to create ideal conditions for mob control. First, Nevada's decision to legalize gambling created a unique opportunity. In most of America, casino gambling was illegal. This meant that anyone who wanted to run a gambling operation had to do so criminally, accepting all the risks that came with operating outside the law. But in Nevada, gambling was legal. You could own a casino, make profits, and not face prosecution simply for offering games of chance. This gave organized crime a way to transform illegal gambling operations into legitimate businesses. Second, Nevada's regulatory system was weak. The state wanted gambling to succeed economically, which created incentives to ask few questions about casino owners. Background checks were minimal. Financial disclosures were limited. Regulators often came from the gaming industry themselves and had relationships with casino operators. This regulatory capture allowed mob-controlled casinos to operate for years without serious scrutiny. Third, the economics of casino gambling were perfect for skimming. Casinos handle enormous amounts of cash. Unlike most businesses where transactions are electronic or traceable, casino gaming involves physical currency changing hands constantly. This made it easy to divert money before official counts. And because gambling revenues can fluctuate significantly day to day, it was difficult for regulators to prove that money was missing. Fourth, organized crime families had resources that legitimate investors lacked. In the 1940s and 50s, banks were reluctant to loan money for casino construction. Gambling was seen as a risky, morally questionable business. But mob families had millions in cash from bootlegging, illegal gambling, and other criminal enterprises. They could finance casino construction when no one else would. This gave them enormous leverage over casino operators who needed capital. Fifth, the mob had a national structure. Families in different cities cooperated through the commission and other coordinating bodies. This meant that Las Vegas casinos could be controlled by Chicago, while also benefiting Cleveland, Kansas City, and other families. The profits were shared, reducing conflicts and creating broad support for the Las Vegas operation across organized crime. Sixth, the threat of violence kept people in line. Casino employees knew what could happen if they stole or talked to authorities. The occasional murder served as a reminder. This created a culture of silence and loyalty that protected the skimming operation. People who might have otherwise cooperated with law enforcement stayed quiet out of fear. But ultimately, the mob's success in Las Vegas was temporary. Federal law enforcement developed the tools and persistence to penetrate the organization. Corporate ownership provided a cleaner, more efficient model for casino operation. Nevada's desire for respectability pushed regulators to strengthen oversight. The factors that had allowed mob control gradually disappeared. The human cost. The history of the mob in Las Vegas is often told as a story of colorful characters, daring schemes, and eventual justice. But there was a human cost that should not be forgotten. People died. Some were criminals who accepted the risks of their lifestyle. But others were innocents caught in the violence. Wives and girlfriends of mobsters sometimes became victims. Witnesses who agreed to testify lived in fear. Casino employees who saw too much faced terrible choices. Participate in crimes or risk retribution. The corruption of public officials harmed Las Vegas's development. Money that should have gone to schools, roads, and public services instead enriched criminals. Police departments focused on protecting mob interests rather than serving the public. Judges made decisions based on bribes rather than justice. The normalization of vice created social problems. While gambling itself is not inherently harmful, problem gambling ruins lives. Some people lost everything in Las Vegas casinos. Their savings, their homes, their families. The mob-controlled casinos were not interested in responsible gambling or protecting vulnerable people. They wanted maximum revenue and did not care about the consequences. The mythology of the mob era also obscures the reality of organized crime. Films and television shows often present mobsters as anti-heroes. honorable criminals who live by codes and protect their communities. The reality was far less romantic. The mob was a criminal enterprise, motivated by greed. They engaged in extortion, violence, drug trafficking, and exploitation. They harmed communities and destroyed lives. This is not to say that modern corporate Las Vegas is perfect. Casino companies still profit from gambling, which can be addictive and harmful. They still lobby for favorable regulations. They still prioritize profit over public welfare in many situations. But the corporate model is at least subject to laws, regulations, and public accountability in ways that mob operations never were. Meyer Lansky's vision. One figure deserves special mention in the story of the mob's Las Vegas empire. Meyer Lansky. Lansky never lived in Las Vegas. He never openly owned a casino there. He never became a public figure in the city. But his influence was profound and pervasive. Meyer Lansky was one of organized crime's most brilliant minds. Unlike many mob bosses who were flashy and violent, Lansky was quiet and cerebral. He understood finance, money laundering, and international banking. He pioneered techniques for moving money around the world to avoid detection. He saw opportunities that others missed. Lansky was instrumental in organized crime's expansion into legitimate businesses. He understood that the future of the mob was not in illegal gambling and bootlegging, but in legal enterprises that could be controlled and manipulated. Las Vegas represented the perfect realization of this vision. Legal gambling operations that appeared legitimate while generating illegal profits through skimming. Lansky helped finance many of the early Las Vegas casinos. He was a partner with Bugsy Siegel in the Flamingo. He had interests in casinos in Cuba before Castro's revolution shut them down. He developed connections with the criminal organizations around the world. He was, in many ways, the architect of the financial structure that allowed organized crime to operate in Las Vegas. When Lansky died in 1983 at the age of 80, he left behind a complicated legacy. Law enforcement believed he had amassed a fortune of hundreds of millions of dollars hidden in banks around the world. But his estate was valued at less than $60,000. Either Lansky had successfully hidden his wealth, or law enforcement had dramatically overestimated his fortune. The truth remains unclear. Lansky's role in Las Vegas demonstrates something important about the mob era. The most powerful figures were often invisible. The bosses who controlled casinos from Chicago, Kansas City, and Cleveland rarely visited Las Vegas. They sent representatives, used frontmen, and operated through layers of insulation. This made prosecution difficult and allowed the system to function for decades. The transformation of downtown. While much attention focuses on the Las Vegas Strip, the famous stretch of Las Vegas Boulevard where the major casinos are located, downtown Las Vegas has its own important history in the mob era. Downtown Las Vegas, centered on Fremont Street, was the original gambling district. In the 1940s and 50s, before the Strip became dominant, downtown was where the action was. Casinos like the Golden Nugget, Binion's Horseshoe, the Fremont, and the Four Queens defined Las Vegas gambling culture. Some of these casinos had mob connections. The Fremont Hotel, for example, was part of the Chicago outfit's Las Vegas empire and was included in the Straw Man investigation. But downtown also had a different character than the Strip. It was grittier, more working class, more focused on gambling, and less on luxury. Benny Binion, who founded Binion's Horseshoe Casino, was a fascinating figure. Binion had been a bootlegger and illegal gambling operator in Texas before coming to Las Vegas. He was not formally part of the Italian-American mafia, but he had connections and operated in similar circles. Binion pioneered many innovations in casino gambling, including higher betting limits and better odds for players. His Horseshoe Casino became legendary among serious gamblers. Downtown Las Vegas declined as the Strip grew. The major corporate casino companies invested billions in Strip properties, while downtown stagnated. By the 1990s and 2000s, downtown was struggling. Crime increased. Properties became rundown. Many downtown casinos closed. But in recent years, downtown Las Vegas has experienced a renaissance. The Fremont Street Experience, a pedestrian mall covered by an LED canopy, brought tourists back. New hotels and restaurants opened. The Mob Museum became an anchor attraction. Tech companies and startups moved into downtown. While it remains very different from the Strip, downtown Las Vegas has found a new identity that honors its history while creating something new. The international dimension. The mob's Las Vegas operation was not isolated from their international activities. Before the Cuban Revolution in 1959, organized crime controlled numerous casinos in Havana. Meyer Lansky was deeply involved in Cuban gambling, working with the corrupt Batista regime to operate casinos that catered to American tourists. These Cuban casinos were even more profitable than Las Vegas properties because they operated with essentially no regulation. When Castro took power and shut down the casinos, organized crime lost a major source of revenue. This made Las Vegas even more important to their operations. The families that had been making money in Cuba needed somewhere else to invest and earn. Las Vegas filled that void. Organized crime also developed gambling operations in the Bahamas, the United Kingdom, and other locations around the world. These international connections allowed for sophisticated money laundering. Funds could be moved between Las Vegas, Caribbean casinos, European banks, and other locations in ways that were difficult for law enforcement to trace. The FBI and IRS eventually developed the expertise to follow these money trails. International cooperation between law enforcement agencies improved. Treaties and agreements allowed investigators to access foreign bank records. But for years, the international dimension of organized crime's gambling empire provided crucial protection against prosecution. How the skim actually worked. Understanding the technical details of the skimming operation helps explain both why it was so profitable and why it was eventually shut down. In a typical mob-controlled casino, trusted employees managed the count room where daily gambling revenues were tallied. These individuals were often mob associates or family members of mob figures. They understood the system and were absolutely loyal. At the end of each day, dealers and pit bosses would turn in their chip trays. Slot machine hoppers would be emptied. All the cash and chips from the day's gambling activity would be brought to the count room. The official counting process would begin. Employees would sort the money by denomination, count it carefully, and prepare deposit slips for the bank. But before the official count, the skim would occur. A predetermined percentage of the cash, usually between 10 and 20%, would be set aside. This money would be placed in bags or containers separate from the official count. The remaining money would then be counted and recorded as a day's revenue. The skimmed money needed to be transported out of Las Vegas. Various methods were used. Sometimes trusted couriers would carry cash in suitcases, posing as ordinary travelers. Sometimes the money would be hidden in shipments of goods leaving the casino. Sometimes it would be given to clean individuals with no obvious mob connections who could transport it without arousing suspicion. Once the money reached mob bosses in Chicago, Kansas City, or other cities, it would be divided according to pre-arranged agreements. Each family that had invested in the casino would receive their share. Sometimes disputes arose about the division, leading to tension between families. The genius of the skim was that it was almost impossible to detect through normal regulatory oversight. Nevada gaming regulators would review casino financial statements, but those statements were based on the post-skim count. Unless someone actually witnessed the pre-count removal of cash, there was no way to prove money was missing. The casinos appeared to be generating reasonable profits, paying appropriate taxes, and operating legitimately. But the system had vulnerabilities. It required absolute loyalty from everyone involved. A single cooperating witness could expose the entire operation. It also required minimal law enforcement surveillance. If investigators could place listening devices in count rooms or wiretap phones used to discuss the skim, they could gather devastating evidence. The FBI exploited both vulnerabilities. They recruited cooperating witnesses by offering reduced sentences, and they placed wiretaps in locations where mob bosses discussed Las Vegas operations. The combination proved fatal to the skimming system. The role of lawyers and accountants. The mob's Las Vegas operation required sophisticated professional help. Lawyers were essential for navigating Nevada gaming regulations, handling licensing issues, and defending against criminal charges. Some lawyers who represented mob-connected casinos were themselves criminals, actively participating in illegal schemes. Others were legitimate professionals who may have suspected their clients' criminal connections, but chose not to ask too many questions. Oscar Goodman was perhaps the most famous lawyer associated with the mob era in Las Vegas. Goodman represented Tony Spilotro, Frank Rosenthal, and numerous other mob figures. He was a brilliant defense attorney who won many cases and protected his clients' interests. Goodman maintained that he was simply doing his job as a lawyer and never participated in criminal activity himself. Interestingly, after the mob era ended, Oscar Goodman was elected mayor of Las Vegas and served for 12 years. His tenure demonstrated how the city's relationship with its mob past had evolved. Rather than hiding from that history, Goodman embraced it, even appearing in promotional materials holding a martini glass and making jokes about his former clients. His wife, Carolyn Goodman, succeeded him as mayor. Accountants were equally important to the mob's operations. They created the false financial records that concealed the skim. They structured ownership arrangements to hide beneficial interests. They established shell companies and complex corporate structures designed to obscure who actually controlled casinos. Some of these accountants were prosecuted when the skimming operations were exposed. Others were granted immunity in exchange for testimony. Their cooperation was crucial to helping investigators understand the financial structure of mob-controlled casinos. The media and the mob. The relationship between media and organized crime in Las Vegas was complicated. Local Las Vegas newspapers were generally cautious about investigating mob connections too aggressively. The casinos were major advertisers. Casino owners had relationships with publishers and editors. There was pressure, sometimes subtle, sometimes explicit, not to dig too deeply into who really controlled the city's most important businesses. But national media was more aggressive. Magazines like Life and Look published exposés about mob control of Las Vegas. These stories brought national attention to the issue and created pressure for reform. They embarrassed Nevada politicians and regulators who had been too tolerant of organized crime. Television also played a role. Congressional hearings on organized crime, particularly the Kefauver Committee hearings in 1951, were televised and exposed millions of Americans to testimony about mob operations. These hearings created public awareness and political will for stronger action against organized crime. In recent decades, films and television shows about the mob era have shaped public perception. The 1995 film Casino, directed by Martin Scorsese, presented a detailed, dramatized account of the Rosenthal-Spilotro era. While the film changed names and compressed timelines, it was remarkably accurate in depicting how the skim worked and how the mob controlled Las Vegas. This media coverage has had mixed effects. It has educated the public about an important chapter of history. But it has also romanticized the era, making mobsters seem more glamorous and honorable than they actually were. The reality of organized crime was far less appealing than Hollywood's version. Nevada gaming regulation evolves. As the mob era progressed, Nevada's gaming regulatory system gradually became more sophisticated and aggressive. The Nevada Gaming Control Board was established in 1955 to oversee casino operations. Initially, it had limited resources and authority, but over time, particularly as federal pressure increased and corporations entered the market, the regulatory system strengthened. The Nevada Gaming Commission, created in 1959, provided additional oversight. Together, these bodies developed more rigorous licensing procedures. They required detailed financial disclosures. They conducted background investigations of casino owners and key employees. They established the Black Book, a list of individuals excluded from Nevada casinos due to criminal associations. These regulatory improvements made it increasingly difficult for organized crime to maintain control. By the 1970s and 80s, getting a gaming license required passing extensive background checks. Anyone with obvious mob connections would be denied. This forced organized crime to use increasingly elaborate front-man arrangements, which became harder to maintain. Nevada regulators also developed better accounting requirements and auditing procedures. Casinos had to maintain detailed financial records and submit to regular audits. These measures made skimming more difficult, though as the straw man case showed, it did not eliminate the practice entirely. The strengthening of Nevada gaming regulation was partly driven by the state's desire for respectability. Nevada wanted to attract corporate investment and tourism. The mob reputation was increasingly seen as a liability. By cracking down on organized crime, Nevada hoped to improve its image and create a more sustainable economic model. The workers' perspective. Most histories of mob-controlled Las Vegas focus on bosses, enforcers, and FBI agents. But thousands of ordinary workers, dealers, cocktail waitresses, hotel staff, entertainers, worked in these casinos and had their own experiences of the era. For many workers, the mob era was actually a good time. The casinos paid relatively well. Tips could be generous, especially in high-end properties. There were opportunities for advancement. And while everyone knew about mob connections, most workers had no direct involvement in criminal activities. They showed up, did their jobs, and collected their paychecks. The Culinary Workers Union, which represented many casino employees, became one of the most powerful labor organizations in Nevada. The union negotiated contracts that provided good wages, health insurance, and pensions. Interestingly, the union's power grew during the mob era, partly because mob-controlled casinos preferred to avoid labor disputes that would attract attention. Some workers, however, faced moral dilemmas. Dealers and countroom employees sometimes knew about the skim. They understood that illegal activities were occurring, but speaking out meant risking their jobs and possibly their safety. Most chose to stay silent. A few workers became active participants in criminal schemes. They helped with skimming, provided information to mob associates, or participated in other illegal activities. When the FBI investigations led to trials, some of these workers were prosecuted or pressured to testify. The transition from mob control to corporate ownership affected workers in various ways. Some appreciated the more professional, regulated environment. Others missed what they saw as the more personal, informal atmosphere of the mob era. But overall, corporate ownership probably benefited workers by creating more stable employment and better working conditions. The political dimension. Organized crime's control of Las Vegas was only possible because of corrupt or complicit politicians. At various times, mob-connected casinos made contributions to political campaigns, provided favors to elected officials, and cultivated relationships with those in power. Some politicians were directly on the mob's payroll. Others simply looked the other way, preferring not to challenge powerful economic interests. Nevada's political culture contributed to this situation. The state has always had a libertarian streak, a preference for minimal government interference, and a tolerance for activities that other states banned. This culture made it easier for organized crime to operate. But as federal investigations exposed the extent of mob control, political pressure for reform increased. Nevada. Politicians realized that the state's reputation was being damaged. Tourism could suffer if Las Vegas was seen primarily as a mob-controlled city. This created incentives for political leaders to support stronger regulation and law enforcement. The political dimension also extended to federal level. Some federal officials pushed aggressively for investigations and prosecutions of organized crime in Las Vegas. Others were more cautious, concerned about federal-state relations, or influenced by Nevada's congressional delegation. The eventual political consensus that emerged was clear. Nevada could have legal gambling, but it had to be clean. The mob had to go. This consensus, combined with corporate investment and FBI investigations, sealed the fate of organized crime's Las Vegas empire. Reflections on Capitalism and Crime. The mob's success in Las Vegas raises interesting questions about the relationship between legitimate business and criminal enterprise. In many ways, the mob-controlled casinos operated like any other business. They employed thousands of people. They paid salaries and benefits. They invested in infrastructure and marketing. They competed for customers. They tried to maximize profits. They navigated regulations and dealt with government agencies. The primary difference was the skim, the systematic theft of revenue before it could be officially counted and taxed. But even this was not entirely different from legal tax avoidance strategies employed by legitimate corporations. The mob was simply more direct and illegal in their methods. This similarity between mob operations and legitimate business is one reason why organized crime was able to control Las Vegas for so long. They were not operating completely outside the system. They were participating in the capitalist economy, just with an illegal component that generated extra profits. When corporations took over Las Vegas casinos, they eliminated the illegal skimming, but they maintained many of the same business practices: aggressive marketing, customer loyalty programs, efforts to maximize gambling revenue. The main change was that profits now went to shareholders rather than mob bosses, and taxes were properly paid. This raises questions about morality and legality in capitalism. Is a corporation that legally maximizes profits and minimizes taxes fundamentally different from a mob-controlled casino that skims profits? Both are trying to extract maximum wealth. Both employ people and create economic activity. Both operate within whatever legal framework allows them to profit most effectively. These are not easy questions to answer, but they are worth considering when reflecting on the mob era in Las Vegas and its transformation into corporate ownership. The myth and the reality. As we reach the end of this long journey through the history of the mob in Las Vegas, it is worth reflecting on the gap between myth and reality. The myth presents the mob era as a golden age. Casinos were glamorous and exciting. Celebrities and high rollers rubbed shoulders with gangsters. Everything was possible. The atmosphere was electric. Frank Sinatra performed at the Sands. Bugsy Siegel built a palace in the desert. Tony Spalotro enforced mob rule with ruthless efficiency. It was a time of larger-than-life personalities and dramatic events. This myth contains truth. The mob era really did feature remarkable individuals and significant events. Las Vegas really was transformed from a small desert town into a major city. Entertainment culture really was revolutionized. The casinos were genuinely impressive for their time. But the reality was more complex and often darker. The mob era was built on violence, corruption, and theft. People died. Communities were harmed. Public officials were corrupted. Enormous sums of money were stolen from legitimate tax revenues that should have funded schools, roads, and public services. The transition to corporate ownership eliminated many of these harms. But it also eliminated some of what made Las Vegas unique. The corporate casinos are professional, efficient, and profitable, but they lack the dangerous glamour of the mob era. They are less personal, less connected to individual personalities, more focused on quarterly earnings than on building something legendary. Perhaps both eras have their place in Las Vegas history. The mob era represents the city's wild, rebellious youth, when anything could happen and rules were meant to be broken. The corporate era represents mature adulthood, responsible, successful, but maybe a bit boring. Las Vegas needed both phases to become what it is today. Conclusion: the desert glows forever. We began this journey in the desert at night, watching neon lights appear on the horizon. We have traveled through decades of history, from Prohibition's birth of organized crime to Bugsy Siegel's vision, from the golden age of the skim to Tony Spilotro's violent enforcement, from FBI wiretaps to the strawman trials, from Howard Hughes' corporate takeover to the complete transformation of Las Vegas. The story of the mob in Las Vegas is fundamentally a story about transformation. A desert became a city. Illegal profits became legitimate businesses. Criminal organizations became corporate structures. Violence and corruption gave way to regulation and accountability. The impossible became routine. But some things remain constant. Las Vegas is still about dreams and ambitions. It is still about the possibility that everything could change overnight. It is still about the thrill of risk and the appeal of excess. These elements were present in the mob era, and they remain in the corporate era. They are part of Las Vegas's essential identity. The neon lights still glow in the desert. They are brighter now, powered by modern technology rather than gas. They advertise corporate brands rather than mob-controlled casinos. But they still represent the same thing: the human impulse to create something extraordinary out of nothing, to transform empty desert into a city of dreams. Meyer Lansky once said that Las Vegas was a money machine. He was right. It was a money machine for the mob, generating millions in skimmed profits. And it remains a money machine today, generating billions for corporations, jobs for workers, and tax revenue for Nevada. The machine still runs. The operators have changed. Bugsy Siegel dreamed of a luxurious resort in the desert that would attract the wealthy and famous. His dream came true, though he did not live to see its full realization. The Las Vegas Strip today is filled with resorts far grander than anything Siegel imagined. They are owned by corporations, not mobsters. But they fulfill his vision. Tony Spilotro enforced mob rule with violence and intimidation. He believed that power came from fear, that control required brutality. He was wrong. The mob lost control, not because someone more violent defeated them, but because a different model, corporate ownership and federal law enforcement, proved more sustainable and powerful. Frank Rosenthal understood that casinos were businesses that required professional management, innovation, and customer service. He was right. The modern Las Vegas casino industry has adopted and expanded his approach, creating massive entertainment complexes that serve millions of visitors each year. The FBI agents who spent decades investigating organized crime in Las Vegas believed that crime could be defeated through patient, methodical investigation and prosecution. They were right. The strawman trials and related prosecutions ended the mob's control and demonstrated that even the most powerful criminal organizations could be brought down by determined law enforcement. Each of these individuals and organizations contributed to making Las Vegas what it is today. The mob built the foundation. The corporations built the towers. The regulators built the framework. The workers built their lives and families, and together they created one of the most unique cities in the world. As the desert night continues and the neon lights glow against the stars, Las Vegas tells its story to anyone willing to listen. It is a story of ambition and greed, of dreams and violence, of legal and illegal, of transformation and continuity. It is an American story, complicated, contradictory, and utterly fascinating. The mob era in Las Vegas is over. The casinos are clean now, operated by corporations and regulated by government agencies. But the legacy remains in the city's DNA, in its culture, in the stories that are told and retold, in the museums and tours, in the collective memory of a time when the impossible became real. Close your eyes again and picture the desert. The lights still shine. The city still hums with life and possibility. And somewhere in that glow, the ghosts of Meyer Lansky, Bugsy Siegel, Tony Spilotro, and Frank Rosenthal smile, knowing that their impossible dream of a city in the desert succeeded beyond even their wildest ambitions. The story continues. Las Vegas continues. The desert continues. And the lights will continue glowing long into the future, a testament to the remarkable, improbable, unforgettable history of the mob in Las Vegas.